There was a sound, 2 notes, a gavel hitting stone, and somewhere in living rooms across America, people stopped what they were doing. Law & Order wasn't just a television show. It was a 20-year argument about guilt and innocence, about what the system could deliver and what it could never repair. It ran for 2 decades on NBC, became the longest-running crime drama in American primetime history, and made New York City feel like the moral center of the universe. But while the marble halls of that Manhattan courthouse stayed frozen in memory, the people behind it kept changing. Some of the actors who gave this show its heartbeat went on to enormous things. Some carried private struggles no camera ever caught, and some left us entirely, their final bow taken long before we were ready to say goodbye. This is Law & Order, the cast, then and now, in 2026. Lenny Briscoe is the soul of Law & Order in its greatest years. The weary, wisecracking New York cop who had seen it all and still got up every morning to see some more. Jerry Orbach was born in the Bronx on October 20, 1935, which made him 56 years old when he first stepped onto the precinct set in 1992. What he brought to Briscoe wasn't just experience, it was texture. 12 years on Broadway, a Tony Award for Promises, Promises, the original Billy Flynn in Chicago, the voice of Lumiere in Disney's Beauty and the Beast. This was a man who understood performance at a molecular level. Every one-liner Briscoe delivered landed because Orbach knew exactly how much weight to put behind it. The jokes were never just jokes. They were a man's armor. Briscoe, a recovering alcoholic haunted by his daughter's murder, used humor the way some men use whiskey, to keep moving, to keep from looking down. He represented something the show returned to again and again, the cop who carries the cost of the job inside him, quietly, without ceremony. Before Law & Order, Orbach had appeared in Dirty Dancing and Crimes and Misdemeanors. He was, as the New York Landmark Conservancy declared in 2003, a living landmark of New York City. He was quietly battling prostate cancer for over a decade, a diagnosis he kept almost entirely private. He passed away on December 28, 2004 at age 69 at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan. The day after, Broadway dimmed its marquee lights in his honor, one of the most sacred tributes the theater world can give. Lenny Briscoe endures because Jerry Orbach made exhaustion feel like wisdom and made a one-liner feel like the bravest thing a man could do. Jack McCoy is Law & Order's moral engine, the man who believed in the law so ferociously that he was sometimes willing to break it. Sam Waterston was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts on November 15, 1940, making him 53 years old when he joined the show in its 5th season in 1994. What Waterston brought to McCoy was righteous fury dressed in a good suit. His voice alone carried the weight of a verdict. Before this role, he had already earned an Academy Award nomination for his shattering portrayal of journalist Sidney Schanberg in The Killing Fields, 1984, and played Abraham Lincoln for PBS. McCoy wasn't just a prosecutor, he was the show's philosophical center, the figure who forced every episode to ask whether justice and the law are ever truly the same thing. Waterston held that role for 16 years during the original run, then returned for the revival in 2022 before departing in 2024. A total of more than 400 episodes, the longest tenure in the franchise's history. He was also beloved for The Newsroom and 7 seasons of Grace and Frankie on Netflix. At 85 years old in 2026, Sam Waterston remains one of the most quietly formidable presences American television has ever produced. Jack McCoy endures because Sam Waterston made moral certainty feel not like arrogance, but like something close to grace. Anita Van Buren is the still point around which every storm in that precinct turned. Born Sharon Apatha Merkerson in Saginaw, Michigan on November 28, 1952, she was 40 years old when Dick Wolf cast her without an audition in 1993, reportedly because he'd been so struck by her work on Pee-wee's Playhouse that no audition was necessary. That instinct proved extraordinary. What Merkerson gave Van Buren was authority that never needed to shout. She didn't command a room. She simply occupied it, and everyone else adjusted. Van Buren was a black woman in a position of power on a major network drama at a time when that was genuinely rare. And Merkerson played the character with a dignity that never once made the representation feel like a statement. She ran 17 seasons before leaving in 2010, appearing in nearly 400 episodes, making her the longest-running African-American actor in primetime drama history at that time. In 2005, she won both an Emmy and a Golden Globe for her devastating work in the HBO film Lackawanna Blues. After Law & Order, she joined Dick Wolf again for Chicago Med, where she plays Sharon Goodwin and continues to work today. At 73 in 2026, she remains as formidable as ever. Anita Van Buren endures because Esapatha Merkerson made quiet authority feel like the most powerful force in any room. Adam Schiff is the voice in the corner office, the grizzled, pragmatic DA whose moral calculus was always somewhere between idealism and survival. Stephen Hill was born Solomon Kharkovsky in Seattle, Washington, on February 24, 1922, which made him 68 years old when Law & Order premiered. He would hold that corner office for 10 straight seasons, 288 episodes, until he walked out the door as the last of the original cast to depart in the year 2000. Hill said playing Schiff was the hardest acting job he'd ever had. The legal jargon, he told the New York Times, was like acting in a second language. Before this defining chapter, he'd had a remarkable career spanning decades. The original lead on the CBS series Mission Impossible, stage work on Broadway, and film roles in Yentl and The Firm. He had even stepped away from the industry for a decade in the 1970s for personal and religious reasons. A story of self-exile and return that's as dramatic as anything Schiff ever argued. Stephen Hill died on August 23, 2016, at the age of 94. The cause was not publicly disclosed. He was 94 years old. A long life, fully lived, the last chapter of it written in a television courthouse that will never quite stop feeling like his. Adam Schiff endures because Stephen Hill made wariness look like the highest form of wisdom. Mike Logan is the show's raw nerve, the detective who could solve any crime and lose his temper at exactly the wrong moment. Chris Noth was born in Madison, Wisconsin on November 13, 1954, and was 35 when the series premiered in 1990, bringing Logan to life as a man whose conscience and his fists were always in competition. What Noth gave the character was genuine volatility. Logan wasn't a bad cop, he was a complicated one. A product of a rough upbringing who believed in justice, but not always in restraint. His exit from the show after season 5 in 1995 came down to a contract dispute, and the character was written out in a way that felt entirely true to Logan. He punched a homophobic politician and was banished to Staten Island. After Law & Order, Noth became Mr. Big on Sex and the City, arguably the most famous departure a procedural actor has ever made, and later starred in The Good Wife. He reprised Logan on Law & Order: Criminal Intent from 2005 to 2008. Then in December 2021, multiple women came forward with allegations of sexual assault against Noth, allegations he denied. He was dropped from And Just Like That, and his career came to an abrupt halt. His Wikipedia page lists his years active as ending in 2021. He is 71 years old in 2026. It is a story that sits heavily alongside the character he played, a man who always pushed past the line. Mike Logan endures as one of the great early faces of this franchise, even as Chris Noth's real-life story became one of its darkest footnotes. Claire Kincaid is the show's conscience in its middle years, sharp, principled, and more emotionally honest than almost anyone else in that building. Jill Hennessy was born on November 25, 1968, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and was just 24 years old when she arrived on set in 1993 for season 4. By her own account, joining a show that was close to cancellation and had been pressured to add women to the cast. What she brought was something the show hadn't quite had before: youth with genuine moral weight. Kincaid didn't just argue cases, she felt them, and Hennessy made that vulnerability look like strength rather than weakness. The addition of Kincaid and Van Buren in the same season, Hennessy has said, coincided with the show's ratings turning around. She left in 1996, fearing typecasting, and her exit was genuinely shocking. Kincaid died in a car accident in the season finale, a conclusion so abrupt it stunned audiences. After Law & Order, Hennessy starred for 6 seasons in Crossing Jordan and has never stopped working. In 2026, she's appearing in the Hallmark Plus series Hope Valley, 1874. She is 57 years old. Claire Kincaid endures because Jill Hennessy made moral seriousness feel urgent and alive, rather than righteous and cold. Ray Curtis is the show's tension between the personal and the professional, a man deeply devoted to family and faith, working a job that tested both every single week. Benjamin Bratt was born in San Francisco, California on December 16, 1963, and was 31 when he stepped into the show in 1995, replacing Chris Noth in what could have been an impossible position. He made it look effortless. Where Logan was fire, Curtis was something more conflicted. A Catholic, a devoted husband with a wife battling multiple sclerosis, a man whose moral conservatism occasionally put him at odds with the more liberal McCoy, while still standing on the right side of the cases. Bratt had already appeared in Demolition Man, Clear and Present Danger, and The River Wild before Law & Order made him a household name. He left in 1999, earned an Emmy nomination for his final season, and went on to a genuinely impressive film career. Traffic, Miss Congeniality, Pinheiro, and the voice of the villain Ernesto de la Cruz in Pixar's Coco in 2017. In 2025, he played Bail Organa in the 2nd season of Andor. At 62 years old in 2026, Benjamin Bratt is still very much working. Ray Curtis endures because Benjamin Bratt made idealism look like something a complicated man fights to hold on to, not something that comes naturally. Ed Green is the show's pulse in its later years. Fast, instinctive, a detective who operated on pure New York energy, and somehow always ended up on the right side of the truth. Jesse L. Martin was born Jesse Lamont Watkins on January 18, 1969 in Rocky Mount, Virginia, and was 30 years old when he joined the show in 1999, inheriting Jerry Orbach's legendary partnership in what could have been a thankless position. What Martin brought was kinetic warmth. Where Briscoe had been weary wisdom, Green was live wire intelligence. A younger detective who hadn't yet learned to keep his feelings off his face, and who brought an emotional immediacy that gave the show new energy in its 2nd decade. Before Law & Order, Martin had originated the role of Tom Collins in the Broadway production of Rent, a performance so singular that he reprised it in the 2005 film adaptation while still mid-run on the series. He stayed through season 18, left in 2008, and went on to spend nearly a decade as Captain Joe West on The Flash, until a serious back injury in 2018 forced him off the show and into a long, difficult recovery. He returned to television on the NBC series The Irrational, and in 2026, he joins Percy Jackson and the Olympians as Frederick Chase. He is 57 years old. Ed Green endures because Jesse L. Martin made emotional honesty look like the most natural thing in the world, even when everything around him was in chaos. Ben Stone is where Law & Order began, the man who set the moral temperature of the whole show before anyone else had a chance to. Michael Moriarty was born in Detroit, Michigan on April 5, 1941, and was 48 when the show premiered with him as its legal anchor in 1990. He was already a decorated actor. Tony Award, multiple Emmys, Golden Globe, and he brought to Ben Stone a quality that the show had never quite found again in quite the same form. A pure, almost painful sincerity. Stone didn't perform conviction, he was conviction. And then in 1994, everything broke apart. Moriarty publicly attacked Attorney General Janet Reno over her comments about television violence, declared war on the network, accused Dick Wolf of failing to back him, and ultimately departed the show under circumstances that both sides dispute to this day. He decamped to Canada, calling himself a political exile, and continued working there in smaller productions before drifting toward retirement. His character was later revealed to have died in a Law & Order SVU episode in 2018. A quiet curtain call for the man who had set the whole thing in motion. At 85 years old in 2026, Michael Moriarty is one of the great uncelebrated figures of the franchise's history. A man whose departure created the vacancy that Jack McCoy filled, and whose original run the show has never fully stopped being compared to. Ben Stone endures because Michael Moriarty made moral certainty feel like a wound rather than a virtue. Max Greevey is Law & Order's forgotten foundation. The original senior detective, the first man to establish what this show would feel like before everything else fell into place. George Dzundza was born in Rosenheim, Germany on July 19, 1945, the son of Ukrainian and Polish parents who had been forced into Nazi labor during the war. He spent his early years in displaced persons camps before his family eventually immigrated to the United States, settling in New York City. He was 44 when the show premiered, and he gave Greevey a blue-collar solidity that felt genuinely lived in. A career cop who brought the weight of years to every scene. He had already appeared in The Deer Hunter and would go on to Basic Instinct, Crimson Tide, and Dangerous Minds. But his time on Law & Order was brief. After the first season, the long commute between New York and his home in Los Angeles became unsustainable, and he chose his family over the role. The character was killed off at the start of season 2, murdered by a drug dealer, a death that established the show's willingness to shock its audience with consequence. Dzundza's Wikipedia page lists his years active as ending in 2011. He is 80 years old in 2026 and largely retired. Max Greevey endures because George Dzundza made credibility feel like a birthright, and because his departure, and the death it required, was the first sign that Law & Order was playing for keeps. Paul Robinette is the show's early moral compass in the courtroom, a young black prosecutor navigating a justice system that was never built to serve people who look like him, and doing it with unwavering intelligence. Richard Brooks was born in Cleveland, Ohio on December 9, 1962, and was 27 when the show launched, making him one of its youngest original cast members. What he gave Robinette was a quiet gravity that the role absolutely required. Robinette frequently wrestled with cases where race and the law collided, and Brooks never let the character use those moments for easy speeches. Instead, he made Robinette's conflict internal, visible in the jaw, the eyes, the precise way he chose his words. Brooks left the series after season 3, moved through a strong character actor career, playing the villain Judah Earl in The Crow, City of Angels, the unforgettable bounty hunter Jubal Early in Joss Whedon's Firefly, and spending several seasons on the BET drama Being Mary Jane. He returned to Law & Order multiple times in later years, now playing Robinette as a defense attorney, a fascinating turn for a character who once prosecuted from the same courthouse floor. In 2026, at 63 years old, Richard Brooks continues to work. Paul Robinette endures because Richard Brooks made institutional conflict feel deeply, quietly personal. Joe Fontana arrived to fill the biggest shoes in the history of the franchise, a task that would have flattened a lesser actor, and one that Dennis Farina turned into something genuinely his own. Farina was born Donaldo Guglielmo Farina in Chicago, Illinois, on February 29, 1944, a leap day birthday, and spent 18 years as a real Chicago police detective before ever walking onto a set. He was 60 years old when he joined Law & Order in season 15, replacing Jerry Orbach, and what he brought was something no other cast member had: the actual thing. Fontana had flashy suits and an expensive car, a swagger that contrasted deliberately with Orbach's rumpled Briscoe, and Farina made every bit of it completely believable because he hadn't been pretending to be a cop. He'd been one. He had worked with Michael Mann as far back as Thief in 1981, appeared in Manhunter, Midnight Run, Get Shorty, Saving Private Ryan, and Snatch, where his comedic timing was devastating. His 2 seasons on Law & Order were cut short only by his own choice to move on. Then, on July 22, 2013, Dennis Farina died in a hospital in Scottsdale, Arizona, after suffering a blood clot in his lung. He was 69 years old. It was sudden, and it was shocking, and the entertainment world lost one of the most effortlessly authentic character actors it had ever produced. Joe Fontana endures because Dennis Farina made real authority feel like something you earned on the street, not something you learned in a classroom. Arthur Branch is the show's great experiment in blurring the line between fiction and reality. A conservative Southern District attorney who was, in every meaningful way, a version of the man playing him. Fred Thompson was born in Sheffield, Alabama on August 19, 1942, and came to acting not from drama school, but from law school. He graduated from Vanderbilt's law program in 1967, served as Republican counsel during the Senate's Watergate investigation in 1973, and first appeared on screen in 1985 playing himself in a film based on a case he had actually argued. He spent 2 terms as a U.S. Senator from Tennessee before walking into the role of D.A. Branch in 2002, at 60 years old, with more real-world gravitas than any other actor in the franchise's history. What Thompson brought to Branch was effortless institutional authority. He didn't need to perform power, he had actually held it. He left the show in 2007 to launch a presidential campaign. The campaign went nowhere. He returned to acting afterward, working steadily in smaller roles. Then, on November 1, 2015, Fred Thompson died in Nashville from a recurrence of lymphoma. He was 73 years old. There is no actor in the history of Law & Order whose real life and fictional role blurred so completely. Arthur Branch endures because Fred Thompson made conservatism feel like a conviction rather than a performance, because for him, it simply was. Nora Lewin is the show's quiet disruption, the first woman to hold the position of New York County District Attorney in the series' history, an academic thrust into a job for which her critics said she was too theoretical and too gentle. Diane Wiest was born in Kansas City, Missouri on March 28, 1948, and was 52 years old and already one of the most decorated actresses in American cinema when she joined Law & Order for its 11th and 12th seasons in 2000. 2 Academy Awards, a Golden Globe, a BAFTA nomination, Wiest brought to Lewin a precision and fragility that the role specifically demanded. Lewin was not a bruiser. She was a law professor navigating a political world that resented her presence, and Wiest made that tension feel genuinely uncomfortable, rather than merely dramatic. It was a graceful piece of countercasting, placing a character who seemed out of her depth with an actress who was absolutely in hers. After Law & Order, Wiest won another Emmy for the HBO series In Treatment in 2008, spent 4 seasons on the CBS comedy Life in Pieces, and appeared in Only Murders in the Building in 2025. At 78 years old in 2026, she has never stopped working. Nora Lewin endures because Diane Wiest made intellectual authority feel quietly, stubbornly brave. Jamie Ross is the show's sharpest conversationalist in the legal half. A prosecutor who could match Jack McCoy point for point and wasn't afraid to let him know it. Carey Lowell was born in Huntington, New York on February 11, 1961, and was 35 when she joined the show in its 7th season. Already known internationally as Bond girl Pam Bouvier from License to Kill, 1989, and for a role in Sleepless in Seattle. What she brought to the role was adult sophistication, not the dewy earnestness of some of her predecessors, but a woman who had already seen enough of the world to know when she was being maneuvered and wasn't having it. Ross and McCoy struck sparks precisely because Lowell played her as someone who genuinely respected Waterston's character while refusing to be diminished by him. She left after 2 seasons to spend more time with her daughter, and her departures from the spotlight have been frequent and deliberate ever since. She appeared in the revival season in 2022, but reports suggest her primary creative energy in recent years has gone towards ceramics. She runs a studio from her home in upstate New York, a pivot that says something rather lovely about what she values. She is 65 years old in 2026. Jamie Ross endures because Carey Lowell made intelligence look like the most quietly devastating quality a person could have. Abby Carmichael is the show's most unapologetically fierce prosecutor, a Texas conservative who walked into that very liberal Manhattan DA's office and immediately made Jack McCoy look like the reasonable one. Angie Harmon was born in Dallas, Texas on August 10, 1972, and came to the role having spent her early career as a runway model for Calvin Klein, Giorgio Armani, and Donna Karan, before Baywatch Nights nudged her toward acting. She was 25 when she joined Law & Order in its 9th season, and the contrast she brought was electric. Where her predecessors had all been some shade of liberal or moderate, Carmichael was pro-death penalty, anti-gun control, and entirely unapologetic. A character whose political views directly reflected the actress's own, and who made every courtroom scene crackle with an ideological tension the show had never quite achieved before. The line, "No deals for anybody, let's hang 'em all," became something of a signature. She left in 2001, moved to Rizzoli and Isles on TNT for 7 seasons playing Detective Jane Rizzoli, and has continued working in television and film ever since. She is 53 years old in 2026. Abby Carmichael endures because Angie Harmon made true belief, even belief you might disagree with, feel like the most powerful thing in any room. Serena Sutherland is the show's most dramatically controversial exit. A character whose 4-year journey ended in a single line that stunned audiences, sparked a national conversation, and has never quite been forgotten. Elizabeth Röhm was born in Düsseldorf, West Germany on April 28, 1973, the daughter of a German lawyer and an American television writer. She joined the show in 2001 for season 12, and over 4 seasons gave Sutherland a quiet moral seriousness. An ADA who opposed the death penalty, who often found herself at odds with the more hardline Branch and McCoy, and who wore her conscience visibly. Then, in her final episode in January 2005, DA Branch fires her. And she looks at him and says, "Is it because I'm a lesbian?" It was a reveal that had been building, Röhm said, in the subtext she'd been playing for years. GLAAD criticized the moment for using a gay character's identity as a shock device at the instant of her departure. Röhm has defended it as intentional and earned. The debate it started was real, and the discomfort it produced was productive. After Law & Order, Röhm carved out a strong film career, notably in David O. Russell's American Hustle, 2013, and Joy, 2015, and returned to the franchise in 2022, not as an actress, but as a director. She is 53 years old in 2026, and still very much working. Serena Sutherland endures because Elizabeth Röhm made moral conscience feel like a vulnerability, and then turned the door slamming on it into one of the most memorable moments in the show's history. Alexandra Borgia is the show's most shocking loss, a character the audience had grown to trust, killed with a violence so sudden it knocked the air out of a generation of viewers. Annie Paris was born Anne Marie Cancelmi on July 31, 1975, in Anchorage, Alaska, raised in Seattle, and she took the stage name Paris from her maternal grandmother. She was 29 when she joined Law & Order in season 15, stepping into the chair recently vacated by Serena Sutherland, and making Borgia feel like a wholly different kind of ADA, warmer, more collaborative, occasionally impatient with the rigidity of the system she served. Paris had built her career on Precision, a daytime Emmy nomination for As the World Turns, a supporting role in National Treasure, small but sharp appearances in film and television. On Law & Order, she gave Borgia a humanity that made the character's ending utterly devastating. In the season 16 finale, Borgia is kidnapped and murdered by a drug lord, her body discovered in an alley. It remains one of the most viscerally upsetting character deaths in procedural television history. The show, which rarely lingered on grief, was genuinely shaken. After Law & Order, Paris went on to the following opposite Kevin Bacon and built a steady, respected screen career. In March 2025, she was cast in the 2nd season of Daredevil, Born Again. There is also a quietly remarkable personal footnote. Her brother Louis Cancelmi is married to Elizabeth Waterston, Sam Waterston's daughter, making Annie Paris, in some beautiful roundabout way, part of the Law & Order family long after Borgia was gone. She is 50 years old in 2026. Alexandra Borgia endures because Annie Paris made safety feel possible, and that made her loss feel genuinely unbearable. Cyrus Lupo is the show's final new voice, the last detective to walk into that precinct before the lights went out in 2010, and he brought to the role a tightly coiled intelligence that the show had earned the right to expect by its 18th season. Jeremy Sisto was born in Grass Valley, California on October 6, 1974, the son of a jazz vibraphonist father and an actress mother, and he was 33 when he joined the show in 2008. The character was built around a kind of restless internal damage, a detective transferred from the intelligence division, carrying something he didn't entirely show. Sisto had already proven his range in Clueless, 1995, 5 seasons of HBO's 6 Feet Under as the volatile Billy Chenoweth, and a turn as Jesus Christ in a CBS miniseries that most actors would have buckled under. He made Lupo feel lived in and off balance in the best possible way. After Law & Order ended, he reunited with Dick Wolf again in 2018 for the CBS procedural FBI, where he has played Jubal Valentine across multiple seasons and spin-offs ever since, becoming one of the most consistent presences in Wolf's universe. He is 51 years old in 2026, and still very much in the building. Cyrus Lupo endures because Jeremy Sisto made guarded men feel like the most honest people in the room. Connie Rubirosa is Law & Order's final great ADA, the woman who saw the show through its last 4 original seasons and brought to the role something that felt genuinely new: a Latina prosecutor at the center of one of television's most iconic institutions in an era when that still mattered enormously. Ilana de la Garza was born in Columbus, Ohio on June 18, 1976, raised in El Paso, Texas, and her path to acting was unconventional. She had studied physical therapy and social work at the University of Texas at El Paso, won a beauty pageant title, moved to New York, and worked her way up through soap opera credits and commercial work before landing Law & Order in 2006. She was 30 when she walked onto that set. What she gave Rubirosa was a grounded moral clarity. Not the ferocity of Abby Carmichael or the careful deliberateness of Claire Kincaid, but a centered, watchful intelligence that made her one of the most trustworthy prosecutors the show had ever had. She received nominations from the Imogen Foundation and the Alma Awards for the role, recognitions that reflected what representation on this scale actually meant at the time. After the show's cancellation in 2010, she continued the character in the short-lived Law & Order LA, then built a second act entirely within the Dick Wolf universe. Joining Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, then Forever, then FBI and its spin-offs, where she plays Assistant Special Agent in Charge Isabel Castile with the same calm authority she always had. She is 49 years old in 2026, still inside the franchise, still working. Connie Rubirosa endures because Ilana de la Garza made institutional trust feel like something worth fighting to deserve. Phil Serretta is the show's bridge between its raw first chapter and its golden years. The detective who held the precinct together after Max Greevey was killed, and who gave Mike Logan something to believe in before Lenny Briscoe arrived to replace them both. Paul Sorvino was born in Brooklyn, New York on April 13, 1939, and was 51 years old when he stepped into the show in season 2. The casting was exactly right. Sorvino had a physical and moral enormity that suggested not just a cop, but a man who had been carrying New York on his back for decades. What he brought to Serretta was compassion set inside a formidable frame. A detective who was tough with criminals and genuinely tender with victims, a counterpoint to Greevey's blunter edges. He was already known for Goodfellas when he joined the show, playing Paulie Cicero for Scorsese in 1990, and he would go on to Romeo, Juliet, and Nixon. But his secret first love was always opera. The long production hours threatened his vocal cords, and after 2 seasons, when Serretta was written out after being shot, Sorvino left to pursue the singing career that had always run parallel to his screen work. He played, painted, wrote poetry. He kept performing, on screen and in concert halls for 30 more years. Then, on July 25, 2022, Paul Sorvino died of natural causes at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. He was 83 years old. His daughter Mira wrote, "I'm sending you love in the stars, Dad, as you ascend." Phil Serretta endures because Paul Sorvino made tenderness look like the most powerful thing a big man could possess. And that brings us to the end of this long, remarkable walk through 20 years of American television. The gavel still rings in the cold open. The two-note musical sting still stops rooms, but the people who made it, they scattered in every direction that life allows. Some kept shining. Sam Waterston and Esapatha Murkison are still here, still working, still commanding. Jesse L. Martin is still on set somewhere, still finding new worlds to inhabit. Jeremy Sisto never really left Dick Wolf's universe. Angie Harmon made herself a second franchise. Benjamin Bratt became a Pixar villain and loved it. Some fought private battles. Michael Moriarty burned his bridges on the way out of the country and spent decades reckoning with what that cost him. George Zunza chose his family and his peace over the city that was slowly breaking him. Chris Noth built one of the great second acts in television history, and then watched it collapse in a single news cycle. And some are now gone. Jerry Orbach, who lit up Broadway before he lit up that precinct. Paul Sorvino, who could play a gangster and sing Puccini and make you believe he was built for both. Stephen Hill, who was 94 years old and had seen everything. Dennis Farina, who was the real thing before he ever played the real thing. Fred Thompson, who lived inside the line between actor and public servant for so long that the line simply dissolved. Law and Order ran for 20 years the first time. It gave us 49 detectives, 30 prosecutors, 12 district attorneys, and 1 lieutenant who was there almost the whole way. It gave us all of these people and all of their stories, on screen and off. Tell us in the comments which character you still carry with you all these years later. Which partnership, which moment, which episode you'll never forget. If this video moved you, hit like, subscribe to Retro Rewind, and stay with us, because there are a lot more stories still left to tell.